Dr. James.
Howdy, everybody. Yeah, I guess I have had a real fun time. Come on down. There's more seats. Come on, don't stand up. It hurts my feelings to have people standing up. In any case, what we're showing here is the combination of CyberNetOps, and I'm going to introduce the term CyberNetOps because in some ways I may have been one of the first people to use the term NetOps. Back in '86, I wrote a paper dealing with some problems we were having on IoT&E for a system called Maneuver Control Systems. They looked for an expert to go help figure out what was wrong. They couldn't find one, so they sent me. And one of the things that I wrote back in the paper was there were no processes in place to do the higher level thinking about how do you operate a system to support a warfighter. There was plenty of stuff that existed about how to do net management, but I felt there was a need for a term that dealt with net operations. And then in the late 90s, when I was in the Army staff, I was part of the group that developed the gig policies, and I co-chaired, along with DISA, the NetOps panel. So I have a long history with the term NetOps. I want to read, I use the term CyberNetOps because I'm trying to capture something that is changing. Obviously, what's changing is the convergence of the tools and solutions that are used for the operation, sustainment, management, and defense of the nation. What we find is that the NetOps people use the DCO tools to figure out what's going on. The DCO people will look at the NetOps tools. The tools that you in the industry are creating are getting smarter and eating away at the bottom of the analytic capability. So we're finding a convergence, and given the emphasis on cyber, I am coining the term CyberNetOps to capture that idea that there is a convergence between the old traditional net management, NetOps, those kind of technical things, and the things we do to sustain. Because effectively, for many of the types of attacks that occur, they are indistinguishable between things when they break. And so we have to find solutions that are capable of addressing both. My division, we do these things. There are people who work for me who are in 4 different locations. The main location is at ID4 North CD4 North, which is in Fort Meade. There's a branch that's led by one of my division branch chiefs down in Montgomery, Alabama. We have a team out west in Denver, and a team we're standing up now in the Midwest to co-locate with our operations center. And later, as we go forward, I will be establishing branches both in my Pacific branch and my European branch, because we are relentlessly focused on providing the solutions that our warfighters need, the people who manage our capabilities, and I want to have my development team as closely located with the actual operational user as I can, and we'll talk about why that's going to happen. You'll see here we are assuring DoDAF operations. We're optimizing, doing a whole bunch of activities in support of software-defined networking and especially network function virtualization. Obviously, the convergence of the solutions I mentioned earlier, and we're looking for open source, Whitebox where it's appropriate, and finally, we're looking for how do I take the things that are now you'll see in an ops center that are screens of glass, walls of glass. I'd like to reduce a bunch of that to apps running on tablets. I think that the day that we are confined to doing CyberNetOps from a specific facility are going to come to an end, and we'll do more and more of that from wherever you're located. And frankly, that's a good idea because we don't want our physical plant to become the basis for a future target. We want to be able to manage from a Panera if we had to. That's not ideal, but if we have to, we should not be tied to a specific building. And we're figuring out ways to do that, and we're looking at industry as we go forward to provide, when you provide me a solution, do you also provide me a way to consume your products via some kind of mobile app running on a tablet, either class or unclass, depending on the domain. So the people involved. First of all, I want to introduce my team. First of all, Bob Malden. Bob Malden, he runs our production branch. If you want to talk about, if your solutions talk about production or streamline that process or DevOps, you want to go see Bob Malden. Tom Hines can't be here. He is ill, but we have Caroline Kaharski, who's representing him, and we've consolidated both our infrastructure people and our net management solutions in one branch that's able to bring synergy between the infrastructure and the tools that run on top of it. Then we have Andrew Cape. Andrew, if you can stand up. Andrew is our manager down in Montgomery, dealing with the data center tools that we use now. But as we consolidate, we're going to see more and more of the boundaries between the north and south continue to blur. We also have, Alfredetta Cooper. Alfredetta Cooper is a loaned executive from another defense agency, and she is our deputy division chief focused on future plans. We have Scott King. Scott King is our acting chief engineer. So if you're looking at, especially dealing with virtualization and software-defined and future solutions that converge, Scott, you want to talk to. Also joining us is Colonel Quimby. Colonel Quimby is looking at our acquisition system. We have Chris Chevalier, who is working on our Korea solutions. And who else have I missed from my division? Where'd Daryl Blake go? And Daryl Blake sitting over here. Daryl Blake is dealing with our service assurance framework because we are looking at moving the design of our tools and figuring out how things are going to be managed very early in the life cycle, and Daryl is one of our leaders in that particular area. So I think that covers the people who are in charge. So as we look at the world of CyberNetOps, you've got to make sure that I communicate to you what is the environment, what is the operating environment that we are participating in. First of all, we have to recognize that who are the people and the organizations that consume the solutions that we put together, because in effect, my division acts as a service provider for internal DISA customers, and we also are seeing some of the solutions we provide becoming a service that we provide to other DISA customers, especially for, as the General mentioned, we support especially DLA, Defense Health Activity, the Army, with some solutions that they're able to consume, and many of our applications are in fact the way that people track how DISA is performing. It's part of their mission. How did we get here? So the top part represents the people we support: the service desk, workers, mission partners, command and control, PMs, operations, and senior leaders. Obviously, there's a layer of things. There's a display layer and the transactions that float back and forth. There's a whole workflow that's associated with it that deals, especially where analytics becomes involved in helping translate the underlying things on the bottom, which are the underlying servers that support keep track of the logs, the element management systems, the performance management systems, the configuration management, and the cyber ops. This fundamentally, there is a set of servers and systems out there that collect the data, and as we work from the bottom up, there's right now it's not a well-defined virtual data centers, but we do have to accept the fact there is warehouses. It's fragmented, or I guess the fancy word for it is federated. So usually federated means fragmented. But anyway, we have a long-term plan and an effort that Scott is helping us try to figure out is how do we move forward. We have done some consolidation of our CM systems and getting a better effort for that, but it takes a long time to move forward in the area of data warehousing because it costs money, and we have to be very prudent stewards of the resources that the taxpayers have given us to. So that's the operating environment. Now, when we look next, so what are the mission areas? The mission areas that we support, our elements are both at the service layer, our tools use the IP layer, and the transport layer, with all of them connected via an operational support system and a series of out-of-band telemetry or management control planes that are used to connect the elements at the edge, because obviously you got servers, you have routers, you have the F5s, you have a whole host of boxes, and you're collecting the information obviously from the management port. Those management ports are console ports, either physical or virtual, and we have to sort out using a variety of XML, SNMP. Most of it's V3 now. There's still a little bit of V2 left, I think. There's some command line interface for some of the from the smaller items like the CSUs and DSUs, but there's that whole layer of connecting to the edge. Obviously, it rolls up at the internet layer. In each one of and then finally the services layer at a variety of services that are provided. Obviously, connection exists between these and the commercial gateways, the public internet through the IAP net, and our SATCOM gateways. so that there are a variety of solutions, so that the previous slide dealt with who are the people who use it and what are the top-level functions they use. This chart deals with the things that we are managing. Now, when you look at this, I think what you will notice is a completely comprehensive set of systems. And what my standing before you today represents is a change in the DISA operating mentality. Whereas before there was an ecosystem management system, and there was a DISN management system, and there was a coalition management system, and there was an application management system, and there was a DISANet management system. What this represents is the DISA director and Mr. Bennett, Mr. Montemoreno, Mr. Rivera, and the collective set of executives who are saying, no, we should manage this thing as a whole. Obviously, this is a train that has been on a great track for a long time with some great leaders who crafted very well-defined, highly functioning systems. So it takes a while for that well-defined but not necessarily fully interoperable to be rehomed into an integrated system. And what we are doing in DISA is, in fact, working our way through. We're using the Service Assurance Framework as our organizing principle, so you can talk to Daryl about that later, what that means. We have Ms. Cooper, who is in charge of leading that convergence plan that is being done across the agency to help us redefine how we manage things. So, what was the baseline? The baseline is shown on this particular chart, and some of these are the old terms. We deliberately chose the old term because this is the baseline. If those of you recognize some of these terms have changed, we've obviously have moved beyond the baseline, but we're not yet gotten to the future, which frankly we'll probably never get to in the end because life keeps happening, industry keeps developing new tools, and we keep finding ways to take advantage of them at an affordable way. What this represents then is we had at one point a DISN management system. There were 4 different operating locations that with primary and backup at many of them. There were multiple out-of-band networks that were using separate hardware and software and separate boundary accreditations, with the key management centers being done in Europe, in Scott Air Force Base and at Fort Island, and with a lesser extent in Europe. There was a separate system used for the transport part of the data centers. There was a separate set that managed then the enterprise systems management, services management, which was the tools that were managed for the data centers out of 2 different locations, primarily where those were done. And the JRSS has its management system. We have our NIC, which has its management system, all that's being moved into the baseline OSS. And finally, there were other solutions. The bottom line is this is a lot of OOBs. This is a lot of telemetry, a lot of management that, frankly, we believe is no longer required based upon the quality of the products we can now purchase on the open market, the commercial tools, and then integrate into these environments. So the future then, and the creator of this particular drawing is Scott King. So if you want to talk more about it later, Scott's the person you want to talk to. And what it represents is one way of looking at the way that DISA is taking its particular solutions. You'll see a common OOB. Now, just because it's a common OOB out-of-band network doesn't mean it's going to be a single layer with every person who has privileged access on it. We do see that there's a requirement for, in fact, separate layers. In fact, there may end up being more layers, but through the use of network function virtualization and Whitebox technology, we expect to put out one server and potentially run 4 or 5 different. I'll show you a picture of that in a few minutes, and what that looks like as we see the future. Those of you who are vendors who may be on SOUP, we had a RFI that went out several months ago that we received great comments back from industry on how we could use network function virtualization. So if you have some thoughts or you want to talk, if you missed that RFI, you need to see Scott later, figure out how you might give us some information that might be helpful as we look for that particular acquisition. Then you'll see we have a standard protect layer that protects the management system. Remember, there's obviously multiple layers of any management system, and we recognize that, frankly, given the ability and the assets that they're protecting, we believe we currently craft a very secure system. It's a private out-of-band. We're using the 10 series, 10 dot private IP space to manage this because this particular OOB is in no way connected to the outside world. Now, I'm going to talk about later how we're going to have to deal with some realities that DISA has, but the bottom line is there's a common OOB, common cybersecurity protect, a common element management system. That's the layer, as you know, that communicates with the edge devices, the computer routers, and talks to them, although we see an orchestration function that will certainly reduce the number of proprietary solutions we're going to have to use. There's that layer on top of it, and I use the word network. I'm using network in the larger sense of a group of communicating devices, whether they are servers, routers, switches, or optical things, doesn't matter. They are part of a network that collectively provide the capabilities that we're trying to get to. Obviously, there's some situational awareness because you got to let people know what's going on, and a layer of access control with connecting to the various and assorted network management centers that we have to deal with. So, moving forward, what we see then is this kind of cloud architecture. So, as I look at the chart here, first of all, across the top, you're going to see that we are setting up a system that will be scalable to the entire Department of Defense. And you'll notice we even talk about coalition and beyond, so that clearly as we move forward, DISA is going to be part of a joint combined operations, and the solutions we create must be able to manage activities outside of the DISA boundary. The idea of these separate federated networks is going to slowly begin to crumble because, frankly, as you all know, the packets hate every router they go through. They'd like to see a clean shot. They want to see as few as possible things you got to go through. And as we simplify the architecture and streamline it, it makes it easier and cheaper to defend because right now there's fewer places you can make those lateral moves if you've minimized that particular design. Obviously, you'll see it. We still expect to see a classified and unclassified layer. A term I want to introduce to you and by the way, for those of you who get the presentation, the last slide in here is an acronym list, so don't worry about copying them down. They're all defined at the end for you. But you can see here that the underlying transport itself, underlying boxes by themselves generally are unclassified. Sometimes the building they're in might be, but generally speaking, the underlying information on an individual box basis, when it's collocated, when it's collocated or forget the right fancy term for it, brought together in one place, it becomes classified. So that's why we show that this idea here, coming through a software-defined networking controller or controllers of some kind, which then come through a cross-domain into a enterprise cloud for management. The term I'm using on the bottom is called JMND. Those of you who've been to the JRSS presentations know that's called Joint Management Network. It's the telemetry system used for JRSS. The future of our world, we believe, is headed towards a joint information environment, but there are things that are part of JMN that don't fit into it, a lot of this infrastructure. And so I'm using the term JMN-DoDin to capture that set of tools, when we believe they're network function virtualization based, that will, in fact, allow us to create as many layers as I need to in some cases, lower the boundaries or to allow those particular boundaries to connect beyond the DISA infrastructure. Because there are some places, especially when it comes to connection to our private industry partners, dealing with database updates for flows, for updates for our firewalls and those kind of things, the net flow data, those kind of things. We would like to have an OOB that includes some of our industry partners. So we certainly see that there are a level of connections that then go into this cloud. Now, one thing that you'll see here, a whole bunch of tools. One of the things that's kind of unusual is this one right here. This one of the ones that I was asked to add by some of our DISA senior executives, because DISA recognizes that we are going to see more and more of the commercial cloud becoming part of the infrastructure managed. For those of you who are familiar with the terminology, it's called a hybrid infrastructure. Well, there's still going to be information needed on how well those partners are performing. There's some NIST controls, those who are familiar with this, that talk about that. And each individual acquisition will activate those particular what parameters we receive from industry to tell us how well your particular infrastructure is working. Because frankly, if it breaks, we'd kind of like to know a little bit of what's going on. So you'll see that we are starting to think through the ideas of how does this stuff get managed. You'll see a variety. The term here is VNOC. We are in fact creating virtual NOCs so that if you're on my VNOC and you have privileges, you can manage anything you want to in my particular system. So that if somebody's sitting in Europe and they got some free time on their hands and we have something wrong in the Pacific, they'll have the authorities and the abilities to do so. That's the future. And you'll notice here that I include our service partners. Already what we've set up working with our JRSS friends is the Army having some virtual NOC capabilities. We are talking now with our services and agencies on how we would continue to extend the access to information, either with the ability, certainly read access, but in the future we expect to see some read-write as well as we continue toward a shared approach to managing the department's operational facilities. So, given that, so in the end, what is our tool for understanding and explaining the functions that are necessary? Now, there's two things that I want to draw your attention to. First of all, we have the systems view of the system functions that must be performed to do CyberNetOps. And I'll talk about this in a minute. Now, what you see over here to my left, or I guess my left, yeah, is a separate view that deals with the system level functions. This deals with the work functions that are necessary to manage the network. So at the first level, what we had to do, and we did these both as part of the director's act to look at converging our solutions, is I had to figure out what did the people do who work for DISA who were involved in doing what I'm calling CyberNetOps. And so as you look at this particular chart, let's see how far I can go without either committing feedback or tripping over myself. What you'll see as you look at this chart is on the bottom you'll see here, or you'll see the JRSS work functions, the transport operations functions. For instance, here is the Global Operations Command. There's a decision support. There's service management. There is infrastructure management. There's element management. In other words, what we did was we decomposed the work functions necessary to do the particular capability. Because obviously at the top level, let's perform CyberNetOps solutions for the department. When it comes to designing solutions and converging, while we would like to get to a single pane of glass, it's talked about, or one simple solution, to be able to manage it, you've got to first of all understand what is the work that must be performed to do the activity. Now, what makes this chart releasable is we also included in that particular survey done by an industry partner as the elicitation agent. We also included the system that they used to perform it with. Obviously, that's not a topic we wanted to talk. We would imply an endorsement that we don't want to do here today. But as you look at this particular chart, this chart again should be public releasable. I had it reviewed, so I believe this chart will be available to anybody who wants to get it through whatever the system that AFCEA and DISA are exposing that. But it does list every function, so that from my perspective, when you come in to visit me or visit my team, what I'm looking for is where on this chart do you fit? Now, what's important to know is if you only support one piece of it, I'm probably not that interested, because I am looking for the tool that will do the same function for everybody. Why? Because right now our analysts are looking at too many pieces of glass and having to manually correlate. Well, and frankly, they end up picking their own tools they like better, and nobody has a consistent way of looking at a problem. I would like to get to the point where if you understand this business, you could flip from a server management to a router management. Now, some things at the technical level and routing you probably not be able to do, but you should, from a performance management, event management, and executive and mid-level management of the solution, you should be able to look at one capability, understand exactly what it means for you in assuring good service for DISA's customers. Now, also when you look at the chart, you'll see that we have made distinction between the transport operations and the computing ecosystem operation and some of the other things. I do that because that represents the current state. Because there are some different functions that you would perform perhaps in a network, especially when you go to a full level of decomposition, you would find some different functions that are still got to be performed. However, as we go forward into our open, I call Whitebox approach, where over time I expect to see, especially starting at the edge, we're going to see less and less dedicated routers and switches and more virtual routers, virtual switches, virtual IDSs, virtual IPSs, that the only places you're going to see what I would call dedicated switches will be your big iron stuff, because right now I don't see anybody who could replace the top-level Juniper, Cisco, and boxes of that, the raw switching power of those solutions. We do see at the edge, at least I do anyway, and we're going to experiment some of that next experiment. We expect to deploy a network function virtualization of our OOB starting next year. That'll be, those who attended our forecast industry, you'll saw that we do intend to compete that space next year with the team working on that now to make sure we got our RFP together. So there will be some opportunities in that area. So as you look at that, you say, that's the function my particular tool does. Now, obviously, we are looking for tools that do many of those functions. Obviously, the more functions, the individual tool, the work functions that it covers, the fewer that I need. And it more importantly, it enables the people who develop the processes and procedures that are necessary are able to standardize and become very, very good. Too many cases, when we have too many tools, people aren't able to get deep enough into knowledge of how it can be used. Therefore, by setting it up this particular way, we're able to improve the quality of the information that's available to our customers, most of whom are DISA, but we have customers outside the agencies I mentioned earlier. Now, this particular chart, the SV1, represents a different way of decomposing the functions. So this is the work functions. There is some human being sitting in an operations center somewhere in the world who does these things to perform those functions. And so we're happy to talk to people about those. By the way, we created those. Those were created through elicitation, not from some headquarters idiot. It was done by people who actually work on the operations floor. So this was meant to be a bottoms-up design. That's something that's important to me. My particular part of the organization, as are many other parts of DISA, highly focused on the actual customer, who is our DISA operators and service operators, and we want to know what work they do. It doesn't help for us to dream up stuff at headquarters. So we don't dream stuff up at headquarters. We listen to our customers. We wrote down what they said they do, perform what functions, and then we are able to, as we proceed with our future designs, we're basing them on how do these solutions help us provide those functions. Now, this particular chart represents a different decomposition of the same problem space. Work functions by operators. Work functions of the system itself. So over on the left represents the pizza boxes. This is the pizza box chart, or it's also called the chiclet chart by General Lynn. And this represents the routers, the switches, the dense wave division multiplexing, your compute platforms, the sensor platforms, the internet access point, the storage platform, the TDM stuff, which you may have heard this is trying to go away from, especially the low-speed stuff, Promina. Although we love the capabilities, it's time for it to be carefully looked at. Voice over IP, your firewalls, all of the boxes. So the left-hand side represents the side that the customer sees. Because obviously we don't operate a network for ourselves. We operate our network to support a customer. I remember when I was working on one of the acquisitions a couple of years ago, I asked a consulting firm, what is the number one performance metric for a network? And I was expecting, availability, or I was expecting jitter or wander or something fancy like that. And what he came back to me and said was the number one metric is your customer happy with the part of the network that they consume? So they don't care that DISA has a really high availability for the network. They care about the piece of the network that supports them. So as we look at that, we've got to recognize that I am crafting something to satisfy a customer need. The right-hand side, so these boxes are the boxes that provide that service that our customers need. The right-hand side represents those management ports I mentioned, either console port, you may know them, they can be physical or virtual. But basically what I'm saying is that CyberNetOps, from a cyber function perspective, is based on any information that's collected from a management port, whether physical or virtual, for any function. So you can kind of see how we've built our idea here, and it's necessary to take that approach if you're going to converge it. Because otherwise, people will carve out exemptions to that and say, well, my thing isn't CyberNetOps, and therefore it allows spending money on things that, frankly, duplicate other functionality that we have. So the first layer represents the element management system. The element management system is the part of a system, an information and communication technology system that communicates directly with the boxes. There's an optical, in this case, the FCAP's fault change, auditing, performance, security. That's out of the old NIST standards. There's obviously you could use the ITIL terminologies there if you wanted to, but we've chosen FCAPs. There's the compute EMSs. They're all now we would like them to be the same, but there are differences in how you manage and things you care about. You care especially a lot about processor speed and time when you're doing things. So there's some different. We recognize there's different things, but there is a layer. Sitting at this layer at the boundary are your vulnerability scanners, your patch management, and your endpoint management are in here. So in other words, from the perspective of what is CyberNetOps, first piece of it is the fact that we consume data from management ports and consoles, and we focus on what are the systems that are communicating with those things. That's the element managers. Your next layer is your manager of managers. That takes information coming from the element managers and allows you to do your various activities, your performance management, your server management, your discovery, these kind of things at that particular level. Obviously, at the next level up, there is a orchestration and database layer where you're doing your configuration management that begins to start giving you a consolidated view of what's going on in your capabilities. The next one deals with your situational awareness. We're beginning to start doing our higher level functions that support security and incident management. So that becomes your operating layer here. Across the bottom, you have to have a set of support functions that include your access control, your public key encryption, your risk management framework, your cross-domain solutions that are what I call your cyber security protect functions. Because just as we have to have cyber security on the network side supporting the customers, we also have to have a cyber security protect function for this particular capability as well. When you think about it, if insiders were able to get a hold of this, there might be some damage that would, in fact, harm what we try to provide. So we have a very strong protection system, and we're continually working with industry partners to improve the quality of what we have in place to support the protection of our infrastructure. If you look across the top deals with the collaboration layer. It deals with your ITSM layer, which deals with your ticketing, your orchestration layer, your process and ordering, and your knowledge management to deal with what I call the information sharing and workflow functionality of the CyberNetOps capabilities. Now, it's important to remember that some cases, especially because at this bigger point, we have a lot of gear made by various manufacturers in the U.S., and with those come EMSs. So those tend to be very proprietary at this bigger point. We do recognize that as we move forward, especially in a software-defined networking world, that in many cases, if you build the orchestration correctly in those capabilities, some of these we may not need anymore. So what's important for you is you look at saying, hey, I provide this. Well, what you're going to look at is what functionality from this particular chart. Now, it doesn't mean, from my perspective, that we don't see these areas merging. We're seeing more and more opportunities to, especially with software-defined networking and Whitebox and open source, we're seeing that in many cases a tool that we use for one function, let's say log aggregation here, might also be able to be the same tool that we would use for our security and incident management capabilities. It does, however, allow me, when I am analyzing a particular problem space for how are we going to manage it, I'll say, well, what's the tool I'm going to use to do this function? And we'll say, oh, we already have that. You don't need to buy that. Oh, what are you going to do for managers? Oh, we can do that with this particular capability we already own. So as we're able to use this decomposition to find out where a particular solution fits into our overall architecture. And if it doesn't do one of these things, if there's some new function that comes along, we're happy to add it. It's not meant to be a static diagram, but it does help us to understand and explain the rationale behind decisions, because if I already got a good tool, I need a business case to go get a new one if it does the same thing I already own. So as we look at the world, this is the lens through which I view the domain, and frankly, as does the agency. So what's our future CNO environment look like? What I'm trying to show here, so first of all, we have a whole bunch of people who are in fact operating the CyberNetOps capabilities for the agency. Now, these colors are in fact important, because what you'll notice is they're going to go through some kind of edge router on my new network function virtualization-based telemetry system. We will, on the ASR 9000, or we will create a telemetry core, black telemetry core, you might have heard it called, that, or colorless is another term that's used for it occasionally. And on that particular core, we will see multiple boundaries. Obviously, the ecosystem will have their own color, because there are, especially when you look at the ecosystem, in fact, sells services to customers, and those customers have to be, especially if they've chosen to do some of the system administration themselves, have to be able to have access to their solutions. So we're recognizing that just because I'm going to use the same tool doesn't mean I'm going to put that tool on the same OOB. There's some boundary things I have to work out that's not really I want to talk about today. But the fact is, when we buy licenses, we'll buy licenses for the total set of users, whether I have them on one domain or two or three, depending on the particular design that we choose to balance both integration and the risk with too many people on one particular telemetry layer. Then you'll see they float through a tools cloud where we see a set of tools that are, because I mentioned before, there will be some separate boundaries, because we do recognize that there's a requirement to sometimes segregate, but we would like it to be, we're going to make it be the same tool, so that as you move from one cloud, from a management perspective, you instantly understand what you're seeing. The skills you learned on one particular domain will apply to the other domain and allow us to be faster, better, and cheaper, and do a better job of explaining what's going on for our customers. Obviously, we see this at the end. You notice I'm running through another one of these edge devices, because we expect this particular system to include users who are outside of our boundary. This represents a dramatic change in our approach to out-of-band management. The fact we're going to explicitly accept that customers, obviously, they're not just any old customer, but they've had to be appropriately vetted with the right, 8570 isn't going to go away. Our need to have appropriate authorization for privileged users isn't going to go away, but it does accept the fact that we see a need. As we go to the enterprise operational support system, we go to the joint information environment, that there must be a telemetry system that is common to all of us, that in fact can get wherever we want to, frankly, with we believe little more than deploying a server and squirting out a new layer through the orchestration function. There's some security stack stuff that links all that together. And let me see what else I got. So, I didn't do this. I tried to fix it, and they've got it locked. The bottom line is they would like you to rate this particular presentation. And at this point in time, I'd like to take questions. Now, if anyone has a question, raise your hand. I will bring the microphone to you, and you can ask any question you like, and we will try to answer it as long as the answer doesn't get into something proprietary. So what questions do we have? All right, go ahead and introduce yourself, please.
Mark Southwell, Army Cyber Command. Sir, Dr. Travis, when you look at the challenges of adding the new capabilities, one of the biggest challenges we have as a service and agencies is more and more as we have products pushed down to us, the one thing that is missing from all of the orders that we receive is what products can we sunset at this point. So that's what we're kind of looking at. Is that considered in your under your consideration, sir?
Right, Mark, and hey, thank you. I appreciate the question. So we are already working with Mr. Wang and other folks in NetCom to look at how do we move forward, because there obviously is going to be sunset. But with sunset will also come the opportunity for recompete, because we do believe that the opportunities we talked about, again, I was talking about during forecast to industry, Colonel Lytle talked about this, is we look at recompeting the space so that if we are using one tool now, we may use something in the future. So our intention, and if you want to meet with Alfrenetta for the DISA tools can tell you when we propose to sunset things. That would be something that obviously that we would communicate with Army representatives, Air Force and Navy as well. But Alfrenetta, you can talk to her and her team along with Caroline. She's also part of that team, are in fact prepared to talk what we intend to sunset. And as we do this, we do it, like I'm working with the Army now on Enterprise Service Desk, how we would do that, and it would lead to some sunset in that particular area at some point. But thank you, Mark. What other questions does somebody have? Did that answer your question? Good, thank you. What else? Who else got a question? I can't be that good, so yes, sir. Oh, hey, Mr. Russ. Excuse me, Russ. Sorry. All right. This is. Pass it on down.
Hey, Jim Warren says, can you talk about automating operations and how that fits into this picture?
Yeah, the term I use for his question is automate everything but leadership. Leaders are still required. But we do see that there is, and the term I mentioned before is convergence. First of all, I said that we are, the NetOps people use the defensive CyberOps solution. The defensive CyberOps people use the NetOps people. The people, the companies who sell tools are buying the tools that we used to create glue code and bring together and now creating that glue code for us. We are seeing that the tools that are used for analytics getting smarter. We're also seeing the sensors and tools are also getting smarter so the bottom line is we're seeing a tremendous level of innovation in industry, and that innovation is in fact automating things that people used to do. And that's okay, because there are things that we desperately need people to do, especially in the hunt mission and those kind of things so our intention, Mr. Seuss, is to automate everything but leadership. I would like at some point to have, 4 or 5 people on the operations floor, but that will be a while before we get there. And if you go to Whitebox, it potentially changes how you do maintenance, because it might be cheaper to put 2 of everything out there and just have 3 guys who drive around with a truck full of servers, and they fix things when they get there because it automatically switched to the replacement thing. Obviously, you got to have some kind of automated patch panel, which probably is your most expensive component of this feature. But that's the idea of automating, because we desperately need to, in fact, create some efficiencies so we can invest in new capabilities that are desperately get to the cyber part, the defensive cyber off and other parts of that mission to do. If you notice the term I used before about analytics, because analytics, as you know, is kind of a process, and the term I like to use for analytics is answers to questions you didn't know you were supposed to ask before you ever asked the question. So we're looking desperately at the need for analytics to get to that world using machine learning and the like, and so that's where we are trying to free up resources to support. There's some articles that people have quoted me on a variety of sources. You can look it up, James Travis and DISA, that where we talk some more about this particular idea of automating things. But my term is automate everything but leadership. Leaders will still always be involved, and fundamentally looking at these functions, they still got to be performed. These work functions still have to exist. Some cases, there'll be machine-to-machine use cases, but nonetheless, they still have to be done by somebody or something, and then leaders have to understand what's being done for them so that the fact that it's been automated does not become another attack vector, because obviously we don't see at this point that computers are smart as people when it comes to exercising judgment and leadership, although there are some who talk about the future where that may not be true. In our future, that's not gonna get here yet. But thank you for that opportunity. Another question. Yes, sir.
Dr. Travis, this morning, Mike Warlick again from AFCEA. This morning, Dr. Herman was in and talked about the things that he was doing, and I had a question then that I have now too, because I see the complexity of where you're going. At what point, or are you taking into consideration the core competencies of the services as you look at this new technology being developed and actually delivered? Now I say that for a couple reasons. One is we're going to outsource a lot for the services for their support. Army Cyber Command just created, a cyber training functionality and occupations to account for that. The other services are doing the same thing. So I'm just wondering, if you bring in an outsource to provide this capability, it may have some impact on the functionality that you have for the soldier, sailor, airman, marine, and it's all about employment, it's all about operations, and it's all about tactical operations as well. So do you follow my line of thought there?
So I remember a long time ago, back in 1972, I was sitting in a very hot classroom overlooking the Hudson River, and my military science professor said the mission of the Army is to close with and destroy the enemy by fire and maneuver. In my own little mind, I immediately added, and in peacetime, to train to do so to the point where nobody will bother with the need for the first part. That was my thought at the time. And so the question I'm going to answer is, how does that particular mission statement, which was very clear to me. I knew when I went out into the real Army, I knew exactly what I was supposed to do. Even though I was a Signal Corps guy, I knew, in fact, what my mission was to enable people to be able to do so. So the first part of the question has to do with, I think we're still in the business of figuring out how to answer it. What is that? How does our mission change? Because we have a new domain. There's some debate over whether cyber is a domain. I don't think there's any question. And the way I would summarize it is, do our laws apply to the public internet? As we've watched some of the recent things, I'm not sure that our laws are deterring actions. So we have to, I think we're in a business of rethinking the definitions, and frankly, that's why there still potentially is a need for a separate DoD space, is until we figure out how to deal with the fact that in some cases, the things that are happening on the internet are things that we don't have full ability to control. So, from my particular perspective, we are working with our partners, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, myself, Colonel Jackson on the JRSS side, the work that SEAB does on the endpoint management. We believe we have to help create this. What is the close with and destroy the enemy? Are we prepared to do that? That becomes a part of the question, and clearly it's not fire and maneuver anymore, at least in the traditional sense of kinetics and outmaneuvering so that somebody will not bother to fight in the first place. The question we have to ask is, how are we going to think? And a lot of smart people, jfhq-dodin is dealing with that, Cybercom's doing with the Joint Staff is, and my job here, along with Paul, is Paul, right? Brian this morning, is try to figure out how do we create the solutions. Now, let's be clear. From my perspective, the unified capabilities are an application that we, in fact, will use the same tools for. So in that set of pizza boxes you saw, one of them was the applications of UC. So we would use the same tools that I'm using for server management as I would do for the capabilities, because in fact, you see in large cases, although some specialized devices, especially the big switches that have some proprietary EMSs involved, still are the same solution set, the same workspace as we look at a unified approach, because fundamentally, CyberNetOps is about a unified approach to the management of all the things necessary to do ICT and support warfighter functions, whatever they happen to be, whether it's information operations in an offensive sense, or it's support to warfighters through making the logistics available, the GCCS kind of applications possible. But that would be, I don't think it's a fully answered, but I think it comes as close as I can get right now, because I think everybody's trying to define that. And my job fundamentally is to create the tools so that whatever they decide they want to do, working with obviously other organizations, because we don't do the only people in the space. We have to do it cooperatively, but we are looking at within the enterprise operational support system at some point having a unified, non-federated capability. But it'll be a while before we get there. Thank you, though. Who else has got a question? Yes, sir.
Brian Ford, Dev Technology Group. How does the DISA acquisition strategy correspond to your vision with regard to the changes that are taking place? And can you provide an update? I believe there's an ITSM procurement coming up on what the timing is for that.
Well, I won't say anything wasn't already said, but what Colonel Lytle briefed at the last forecast industry is that we first of all are looking at a recompete of the task orders that directly support us. You can look it up. They expire next year sometime. So we obviously we have to look at are there innovations in the industry. While we have great partners now, there's obviously opportunities for other folks to be our partner in developing. That would be one. Number two, what was also mentioned was the ITSM. We certainly believe there are some other solutions that are out there, and we want to look at the opportunities. So as was said last year, I believe that should be something we would see in the fall or spring, perhaps. But beyond the timelines that were listed in that presentation, I wouldn't be prepared to speak. And then the last thing is, you'll notice that we mentioned convergence. We were looking at opportunities in the next couple of years for how do I look at what the next generation of tools? Well, we have great things now. We see other people developing great things, and we'd like to let other organizations have a shot at helping us do things better, faster, cheaper. Fundamentally, it gets back to my first slide that talks about I'm trying to automate everything, I'm trying to converge things, and I'm trying to find ways to turn those walls of glass that with 50 different accounts, 50 to 100 different accounts people have to log into to a much fewer set based on automated account management and being able to manage some of it, or maybe even all of it, from an app running on a mobile device, both classified and unclassified, or at even higher levels. Because if it works in unclass, I can make it work at any level. But thank you very much. Good. What else do we have? We got 5 minutes left. I want to make sure you get your money's worth. Come on up, sir. How you doing?
Hello, my name's Elliot. I'm a recently retired Department of Army civilian. I was the CIO of one of the Army's research labs for about 15 years. One of the issues that we dealt with during that time and continue to deal with is the need for exceptions to policy. For example, we have developers, software developers, who need to be able to access a discussion forum without attribution as being a DoD employee. So does this approach, does this design, do these tools support the R&D community's need to step outside of that? Things like DREN, outreach, solutions like that are still needed by the R&D community.
as I mentioned when I had my conversation about the use of network function virtualization for my telemetry systems, part of that it deals with improvements to our privileged user access solution. And first of all, I mentioned that we clearly believe that there is a need for those OOBs, some of them, to be extended anywhere we want them to go, even if it's the ones we've traditionally protected and held very close. If there is an operational or research need, we would see that as something that, based on the requirement, we would support. Obviously, the risk management people care a lot about it, but as we get better and better privilege management solutions, and we look at I'm even looking at saying how we go to two-person integrity for certain commands as an example. It also frees us as we get better and better access control, and better, more powerful user access, as well as some of the things that are being done in the area of insider threat to potentially allow that. Certainly the capability I have created will allow what you described to occur. Whether or not the accreditors allow us to do it is the second part of the matter. So from a Jim Travis perspective, we are creating a solution that can extend the management capability for DISA's assets to any place we want them to go, with any authorities we want to give. It then becomes an operational question, a warfighter question, a leadership question as to who gets access to those. That's why it's my term, automate everything but leadership. There will always be the need for leaders to be able to make those decisions that a machine isn't ready to make for us. But thank you. Really wonderful. And by the way, the reason why I didn't say doctor on there, because I'm really JT. So if you see me say JT, and everybody will know who you're talking about. But that's who I am. All right. What other questions you got? Got 2 minutes. I'll make sure you get your full hour of credit here. I don't want you to only get 58 minutes of credit, because that might not be enough to get you over the limit. What other questions do you have? Oh, yes, sir. He'll be our last one, because I think our colonel over here is telling me to get off the stage here. So I'll try to get an answer.
So just a quick question, because this is supposed to be like a DCO conference, right? So it's great that you're building out all these solutions and stuff like that. But how do you square the circle? Because you're living in an environment where there have been any number of tools that have been purportedly, part of the CIA toolkit, part of the NSA toolkit, right? I mean, you think about what happened with WannaCry and stuff like that. So how does what you're building, right, how does that provide DCO against threats that come basically, I guess you would call it in-band, for lack of a better term?
So obviously I failed. What I'm saying is that CyberNetOps includes DCO tools, analytic tools, and NetOps tools. We see that as one domain of tools. There are different operating practices, different skill sets of people using those tools, but it is one tools base. So the squaring the circle is we see this as one unified tools solution for the entire NetOps, traditionally NetOps, traditionally defensive cyber ops, analytics, one leadership, one view, one vision that creates that set of things that allow us to do what has to be done to make sure that the networks do what they're supposed to do and catch the bad guys before they can do something truly dangerous. So, if you want to talk about that more afterwards, I'd be happy to talk to you. But I think I'm out of time. With that, here you go.